product, and consumers will tell you. Top reasons were cost, education was #1 far and away, and privacy, because you had to go online and put your credit card and all of your information there.
So we've already launched chocolate, and you may have heard as well that we have an intention to launch beverages.
Cannabis is more likely to be in a fatal crash than alcohol.
The essential difference between ingesting cannabis versus inhaling cannabis is that the onset is delayed, and once it does come on, it's already on board.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Libby Znaimer.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Libby Znaimer. Recreational cannabis has been legal here in Canada for more than a year. And while in many ways it's been a rocky rollout marked by problems with supply and distribution and a widening gap between the cost of legal marijuana and black market supply. Now we're into Cannabis 2.0 with the advent of legal edibles. We'll look at where the market is going and also take a look back. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
Canada's first year of cannabis legislation ended on a high for Canadian seniors. According to national statistics, people aged 65 and older are Canada's fastest growing group of pot users. In fact, since 2012, there are 10 times as many seniors using cannabis. Yeah. You might think seniors are just going back to old habits. But more than 1/4 say they're first-time users, while approximately half consume for medical reasons. So, while the destigmatization of cannabis has been a long time coming, federal legislation has clearly shown that people are more open to using the drug.
So, has the consumption of recreational marijuana in particular gone up, and is there still a stigma surrounding it? Panel, let's start with you, Pat. You've done some numbers on this.
Yes, definitely the use has gone up, but not as much as one would have thought. We did a study pre-legalization, post-legalization, and our number is about 22% of Canadians have consumed at least once during the year. The acceptability of using cannabis has also only gone up marginally, and I think that's because the main form factor has been smoking rather than the availability of edibles and other form factors.
What have you found, Adina?
Well, as lived experience, I find in my age demographic, which is senior, a lot more people are using CBD and smoking less. But using the cannabinoids for medical purposes, relief from arthritis and rheumatism, sleep, anxiety, pre and post-surgery, knee replacements, shoulder replacements for all of us active Zoomers, and for medicinal purposes. And they're getting off the THC, which is a more psychoactive high, and into more body remedy.
Does any of this surprise you, Amanda?
Well, it's interesting what you mentioned about the CARP, your peers, for example, because what we've seen post-legalization is an increased interest from seniors in particular. They're the fastest growing demographic, and back in 2012, about 1% of seniors had admitted to consumption. And now, fast forward to 2019, in recent past, that number was more like 6% of seniors, so a population of about 400,000. So what we're seeing is post-legalization, yes, there's strong interest in it for recreational purposes, but also on any given day in those recreational stores, 30 to 40% of the questions that consumers are coming in about are medical questions. I think the conversation is easier to have right now with that stigma slowly eroding post-legalization. It's a conversation that's kind of coming out of the closet. I mean, I'm hearing friends who never used to talk about cannabis asking questions. They're wanting to know, oh, cannabis-based beverages and chocolate, what might that mean? Because many of the people in various circles, including my own, are not smokers, so they are turning their attention to what's coming next for cannabis.
What have you found at the retail level?
From retail recreation, we see a lot of it. We are focused on that rec market and not touching on from a health perspective. So we can't answer through regulation any of those questions. But we do find a lot of people coming in looking for answers. And it is much easier to come into a recreational store and ask those questions because that is the only source that they may know of right now. So we're avoiding those questions and sticking to the rec market that we are legalized to sell in while still trying to provide customers with the products that they're looking for.
Do you find that the stigma is lowering?
The stigma is lowering, but not at the rate that it needs to. When we look at the stats, it's interesting to see that, but at the same time, how many people are withholding those answers? How accurate are we able to get full range of stats when the stigma still exists in these demographics to say they don't want to admit that they're looking for CBD or THC products, to say that they came into the Honey Pot or into any other store, and to talk to their doctor and to even what is most likely a lifelong doctor to say, I need to have more information on cannabis.
You know, it's really interesting because here in Ontario, the rollout was really uneven. There were very few retail stores, and there was this setup where you're supposed to buy it online, but a lot of people just didn't want to give their information online. Do you have any insight into that, Rick?
I mean, in terms of online versus retail, I think that it's more just like an availability thing. I think that at the end of the day, people will, order it where it's available. So, like if you look at edibles, for example, the OCS just made it available online first, and then slowly it's rolling out to the retail stores. But if I could, I just want to go back to this point about medical versus rec, because I think what's important to understand from a consumer perspective is that there is almost no difference between the two markets when you're talking about purchasing it. The products are literally the same between the two markets. The excise tax, the government has not removed the dollar excise tax to the medical consumer. So if I'm a medical consumer, I really don't have any, and there's very few benefit plans that cover medical cannabis today. So from a consumer perspective, there's really no benefit to be purchasing from a medical perspective versus rec. And going back to the comments that everybody's made, in most cases, medical doctors aren't really comfortable prescribing it today. And so when you're talking about getting a script for it, in most cases, you're not really going to your personal physician. You're going to one of these clinics that specializes in medical cannabis. So it's, that's why we're really talking about the same market in some ways, but we shouldn't be. Like the medical market should really be a different market, and we haven't gotten there yet.
If there is still a stigma, how do you view that from a public health perspective?
Well, arguably from a public health perspective, we hear many of the same stories of how cannabis and products promote well-being. But as I'm sure many of us around the table know, the challenge has been in terms of getting clear research evidence that actually supports that. And a lot of that has to do with the status of where cannabis was for a number of years. So the reality is that from a medical perspective, most of the research really speaks to, caution and harms and all those other pieces. And we are very much more interested in sort of hearing from folks around some of the positive benefits and hopefully getting some of that research to help.
Well, my understanding is that we're a world leader in cannabis research.
We are indeed, but again, this is this is a rollout that's just happened in the last couple of years, and it's going to take some time to make sure that we're looking at a long enough data set that we can say with conclusiveness that these are some of the expected positive benefits with consumption.
Okay. When we come back, we'll take a look at what was a rocky rollout for legal cannabis and where we stand when it comes to supply and demand. Stay tuned.
That quality supply that maybe people are familiar with in the black market has not necessarily translated to the legal market.
Welcome back. The demand was there, but the supply wasn't as retailers struggled to put cannabis products on the shelves. Was it unnecessary red tape from local governments or the growing pains of a growing industry? Let's start with you.
Absolutely. Speaking about that, especially coming into April and where we came into at the end of August, where we really saw that supply probably quadruple. But coming in at the beginning, it was limited supply, and there was some red tape, and we can speak to that more from an LP side. But what we were looking at and the efficiencies that needed to come in. We were a world leader that was coming into a brand new industry and had to understand it step by step. The efficiencies weren't there for the LPs. They were trying to understand...
Licensed producers.
The licensed producers. And they're coming out with a variety of SKUs, trying to understand what the consumer wants. So the efficiency from a grow room perspective isn't necessarily there. Well, we try and understand what we're trying to provide in a legal market to the consumers and what they're going to want. We saw those changeovers happen after the first 3 months, and we started to see the consolidation of SKUs from the licensed producers and start to see more production come out of what the consumers wanted. By the time we got to the end of August, we saw a huge surplus of product coming into the market that was able to satisfy not only the 24 open stores, but as we continued to progress to more stores opening for Ontario.
So there were very few retail stores in Ontario to start with, and they were chosen by lottery. Like, it really was quite a mess. Does anybody want to pick up on that?
If I may, I think part of the challenge was the change in government. As you remember, the original Liberal government was going to go forward with a model similar to the LCBO with bricks and mortar stores and the online retailing. And then with the change in government to Doug Ford and the Conservatives and the decision to move ahead with licensed producers, that may have contributed to some of the confusion that occurred in the market.
And I just want to piggyback on that. So even when Mr. Ford was campaigning, his talking line was that we want a free open market, and so anyone who wants to sell should be able to. We're going to make it very easy. And then on a dime turned, and we have a lottery system, which in my view is the laziest possible policy solution to a somewhat complex question.
Well, a lot of people thought it was completely ridiculous, but it's gone now.
After 2 tries, and the second try itself being marred with accusations of unfair disqualifications and perhaps overstuffing the ballot box. So there was a lot of pay-to-play conversations, and this, I think, affects the availability, and for consumers, practically speaking, it's made it very difficult to access legal cannabis.
Well, it's interesting. So you had the legal stores, and because of that situation, there were a lot of illegal dispensaries, and we just found out that the city of Toronto spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to block them in with these cement blocks while they were selling marijuana, the marijuana was legal, but they weren't legal. It really seems, very difficult rollout.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thought around the lotteries on some level made sense in the sense that there was this question about supply. The problem was it was a misnomer when people talked about a lack of supply, because what you see now, is in some ways an oversupply in the market. But the real supply problem is a quality supply. So you've had a number of licensed producers who, in some ways, are inexperienced in this business. You were talking about numbers of SKUs in terms of understanding your market, what products you're putting out there, having quality products out there. And so that's really the issue in terms of, that quality supply that maybe people are more familiar with in the black market has not necessarily translated to the legal market. But also, when we talk about quality of supply, the important thing to understand about the black market is, although people may like, the sense or the feel or the taste, those products are typically loaded with pesticides, which you wouldn't find, in the legal market. Maybe you can touch on that a bit, because I think that's an important factor that I don't think consumers know about.
I would say it's a good point about just the scale and the regulation under which we operate via Health Canada is likely unprecedented anywhere in the world. So we are growing at scale with a very, very stringent list of how we can treat the plant. We have standardized operating procedures, so it is highly regulated. To touch on oversupply and demand, and I asked the person with all the stats beside me to fact check me, but I can't think that we haven't done anything except scratch the surface on demand, knowing that in our two most populous provinces, Ontario and Quebec, the rate of retail store per population is around one store for every 500,000 people. When you look stateside to our California colleagues, it's more like one store per 40,000 population. So I just wanted to put that out there, that while Ontario maybe got off on this very conservative foot, no pun intended, there is, things are going in the right direction with the recent announcement to open up additional retail locations.
What about the gap in the price between legal cannabis and black market cannabis? It's something over 20%, and the last thing I read about it said that the gap was widening, not being closed.
But when we look at comparing those stats, it's easy to come and take our highest price per gram and compare it to their lowest price per gram and now create a stat out of it. That's not the case. We have a huge variety of products that hit every price point.
Dina, you want to get...
I wanted to get into this as well. You know, the black market was a cottage-based industry. People who were getting it are getting it from their friends and their networks that are of long time trust and security. And people went out and looked and went to the store and either didn't find the quality or the price was off.
In our surveys, they literally, you know, it was an open-ended question, what's stopping you from using post-legalization? We listed the questions, and we also asked where, and they would list friends. And because we're a not-for-profit, we're not government, so people were much more open to speaking to us even pre-legalization. They gave us quite exact dollar figures of what they spend. When we rolled this up into estimates, they matched studies by Deloitte, which cost tens of millions of dollars more than ours, and estimates from US-based usage, which are tough to transcend to Canada. If a consumer tells you what they're spending, they know if they've been doing it for years. And I would say there probably is a price difference. Consumers will tell you. The top reasons were cost, education was number one far and away, and privacy, because you had to go online and put your credit card and all of your information there. So those things do need to change, I think, to have more and more uptake of use and for health and wellness use.
Yeah. I think Quebec may have gotten it more right because when they rolled out, there wasn't a switch and they went to a monopoly. And the distribution wasn't a centralized warehouse, and they were able to keep the costs down so that they could compete more equally with the market.
From your research, are people saying that if the price of legal cannabis was closer to black market, they would go that route?
It was the number 2 answer of an open-ended question, which listed about 15. So I would say that points strongly to if costs were better, they would think about it more, and they were ready to use it. But the number 1 list of answers, so it could have been, I'm worried about its interaction with other drugs I'm taking, or I want to know about the high, I don't want to get high. If you added all of those up, they were all around a central education theme. So I think there has to be a movement in what we're allowed to market to educate the public, both for health and wellness users and recreational users who want to know, can I drive? How's it going to affect me 3 hours from now? A lot of that was still very open, and I think that needed to be there. So I think cost and education were the top ones.
Okay. When we come back, we'll take a look at some of the new cannabis products hitting the market and what you may find on the shelves near you. That's next.
We've seen the soft chews, we've seen the chocolates coming in, we've seen tea bags as well. One of the things that we're really excited for is the beverages.
Canadians have been using medical cannabis for years to aid their ailments, but now they're also discovering that it can help with their furry little loved ones as well. Isn't that right, Minzy?
Well, currently there are no cannabis-based products that are legal for use in animals in Canada. We're hoping to see that change over the next few years. Veterinarians actually can prescribe veterinary drugs that contain cannabis, but since there aren't any available, currently there's nothing legal on the market. Groups like the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association have really spent a lot of time working with the government to have our voice heard so that we can be added to what's known as the authorization list. So currently there's several investigations going on around the world looking at both CBD and THC, primarily in dogs and cats, but in other species as well.
Well, if it helps him, I would naturally try to use it. And if I would see any type of improvement, that'll be wonderful.
We certainly feel strongly that there is potential benefit, primarily of orals, but possibly some new types of topical medications and some other products for things like arthritis, for pain, behavior issues, neurological issues. With the legalization in Canada over the last year, we have seen over a 400-fold increase of the inappropriate use of mixed cannabis products in pets. It's really time for the government to act and allow us to have a legal pathway for pet parents and veterinarians that have a patient-client relationship.
If it's relaxing, helps them ease the pain, especially if it's towards the end of their life and they're terminal, why not?
It's natural and it's a good option, so I think everyone should be open to trying it for sure.
Remember, before trying any cannabis products on your loved ones, always consult a veterinary expert first. Okay, Miguel, sit. Here in Toronto, Sean Sante for theZoomer. And just like that, it's gone.
Those are some of the options for pets, but pet cannabis products are currently illegal in Canada. So what about us? Edibles are just coming on the market across the country. What can we expect to find on the shelves? Amanda.
All right. Well, already on the shelves today, we have chocolate, for example, which is very, very popular as one format. And it's something that, for example, we've partnered with a chocolatier called Hummingbird. They're an award-winning chocolatier, so we've already launched chocolate. And you may have heard as well that we have an intention to launch beverages, so those will be coming soon as well. Canopy Growth invested in a 150,000 square foot bottling facility in Smiths Falls at our headquarters. So we've been working on this plan for beverages for the last 2 years. So I would say those two formats, coupled with vapes as well, are the new 2.0 formats that you can expect from us shortly.
One of my colleagues was telling me about gummy bears. Do you have gummy bears?
Soft chews are definitely a big item at the store right now. Rolling into 2.0, we've seen the soft chews, we've seen the chocolates coming in, we've seen tea bags as well. One of the things that we're really excited for is the beverages, especially with the lineup that Canopy has coming out. It's going to be a really new marketplace for people looking to consume with non-combustibles.
What would you like to see?
Well, you know, I think there are a lot of us who have an ongoing relationship with cannabis, but we've stopped smoking it and we've turned to the edibles. You know, in my informal circles, people are putting marmalade on their toast in the morning, or they're using the creams that are location specific, or the oils. Or the tinctures that you put under your tongue. There is a turn away from smoking because it's hard on the lungs and it's not good for the health.
What did you find out that people actually want?
Yeah, so the people that currently use, of course, their form factor is smoking, but what they wanted second was edibles. So they've been finding their edibles, whether they were legal or not. And then pre-rolls, and went all the way down to beverages. Beverages actually ranked the lowest. Of those who were potential cannabis users who said they were somewhat or very likely to use once legal and once edibles were available, edibles far and away was number one. Then concentrates at 34%, topicals at 28%. Beverages were all the way near the bottom at 12%. So interesting that consumers are not saying they want beverages. They are saying they want some form of an edible or a topical, and vaping is right in the middle of the road.
Yeah, I'm wondering about vaping because we've seen some disturbing developments with vaping, just, the other kind. So I would have thought that people would be a little hesitant about that.
I mean, if you look in once again, if you look some of the U.S. markets, they're more mature than Canada, like Washington and Colorado. Vapes are, probably even more so than flower is like the #1 usage product, because it really is for those who don't want to smoke. It's sort of your closest connection to smoking, but still getting the product. Beverages in those markets typically are 2-3%. Like they're very low usage rates. Now, obviously, Canopy's got great products coming to market. Maybe it's a a product thing, but clearly, based on your numbers and what we see in the U.S. market, beverages don't really rank up there. And so I would expect the same thing. Maybe you can speak to what you've seen in the first few weeks, but I think vapes and chocolates and I noticed you use soft chews, not gummy bears, because you can't actually use gummy bears and as a form factor.
Okay.
No,
Sorry,
it's
gummy
no
bear.
because it can't be attractive to children, so you can't have them in the shape of a bear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see them.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues was saying she.
Because in the black
does
market,
gummy bear.
in the black market you will find them.
Oh, in the black market.
Right.
Okay.
And actually, that's a lot just due to lessons learned from rollouts elsewhere. Certainly, edibles that were more attractive to children led to accidental ingestions, and that was seen in high numbers in Colorado and in Washington State following legalization of edibles there. And so certainly I think that was something that they wanted to avoid here.
You're nodding your head?
I mean, one thing that we haven't really touched on is when the federal government made rules about edibles, the restriction per package is actually quite low as far as dosage goes, right? And so these rules are geared towards I would say the recreational market, where there isn't a great deal of experience, and to prevent over-ingestion, we've limited per package. The issue with that, and this circles back to something you were saying earlier, because there's no tier for medical consumption, what that means in practice is to actually have a meaningful dose of edibles. You're paying tax on maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 packages in order to reach what you need. So there is, I think, some adjustments that will need to be made at the federal level if we actually want to see a proper rollout of edibles.
Okay, so here's the thing. This is what you always hear about edibles. The problem is that you don't really know how much you need to get high or how long it's going to take. So, Dr. Lowe, I'm thinking that's going to be different with every product and with every person, probably.
Absolutely, and in general, it's one of those things where it really is up to the individual and the product that they're consuming. And that's why, in general, the medical community has this advice to really start low and go slow, and to make sure that you're not consuming on your own in the event that there's an untoward reaction. The essential difference between ingesting cannabis versus inhaling cannabis is that the onset is delayed. And once it does come on, it's already on board, and there's very little that can be done to sort of reverse the dose you've taken.
So is there a range of time that it takes?
So in general, the studies have shown that it can actually be delayed for as much as 4 hours after the time that it's been ingested. So you may have this, say, prior to dinner, you go in and have dinner, and then you may want to drive home and suddenly only to discover that you're impaired or unable to do so. But again, that varies depending on the person and the nature of their metabolism.
Okay. When we come back, we'll discuss the ongoing social and public health issues surrounding legal marijuana. That's next.
One puff for one person might incapacitate them so that they're not safe behind the wheel, and could have little to no impact on someone with more tolerance.
Welcome back. Many Canadians are worried about the social and health issues that come with marijuana use. Everything from overconsumption to the health hazards of smoking to the ongoing concerns about impaired driving. Andrew, what are your feelings about that?
Well, the big thing is we've long had a problem with drugs and driving, mainly cannabis. Now, cannabis is more likely to be in a fatal crash than alcohol. So
do you have numbers to back that up?
Yeah, like in the last national statistics, it's 3 times more likely that the driver, a fatal driver, would have cannabis in their body versus alcohol. So we've, done great achievements on alcohol. At the same time, we've had this merger towards wide use of cannabis, and we need to deal with that issue. And the big thing for us is education. And what we've been talking around the table is how long you should wait. And again, it comes to, if you smoke it, there's a certain period of time because it goes through the body very quickly. When you eat it or drink it, it takes much longer. So we've had to adapt our campaigns to first educate Canadians, if you're going to use this product, a couple of things. You know, if you're going to smoke it, you got to wait at least 6 hours before driving. And if you're going to eat it or drink it, you need to take the night off and treat it just like alcohol. And, you know, in the beginning, like the doctor said, you know, go low, go slow. And the big thing is don't mix it with alcohol, because then all different things, even at low dosages. So, and the risk of crash goes up tremendously depending on the dosage, depending on how close to after you use that you get behind the wheel of a car. And, you know, so it's been a real challenge because, you know, when we look back now, alcohol was so simple to educate Canadians about, where cannabis and mixing with alcohol, mixing with other drugs, whether pharmaceutical or other black market drugs, very complex.
Isn't one of the issues that there isn't really a good roadside test to tell if people are impaired by drugs?
That is absolutely one of the problems. And what we've done is treat cannabis as being analogous to alcohol, right? So we've set these limits. If you're above this limit, you are too high to drive. And that doesn't actually account for an individual's experience. And so one puff for one person might incapacitate them so that they're not safe behind the wheel. On the other hand, that could have little to no impact on someone with more tolerance. And even further on the spectrum, a medical user, they aren't exempt from any of these per se limits. And someone who medicates with cannabis might actually be more dangerous behind the wheel if they haven't taken their medicine. And so none of this is accounted for in the law. And as far as the roadside tests go, there is no reliable way to test for impairment. You can test for what is been used, what is in your system, but that has no connection to, are you safe to drive? And so I think that we're going to see constitutional challenges to the change in law.
I think you have some kind of test with you.
Yeah, this is one of the oral fluid tests that they use at roadside. It basically works on an oral fluid sample. They get a saliva swab, they put it here. This one is a self-test, so you'd break the antibodies, it goes over. They normally put it into a better machine to test, and that will indicate, and one of the things is there's a number of levels, and most people don't understand this within the law, that the roadside oral fluid is at 25 nanograms. So that's the level which it's set to fail. So really, to fail that test, you've had to consume within the last couple of hours and then kind of gotten on the road, and you know, you're definitely in a very impaired state at that level, and that's the first step in processing an impaired driver. The tests you've been talking about are the blood tests, which are the second test. So there's a screening test like we have for alcohol, and then there's a follow-up test. So it's in your system, it's recent use, and then, you know, they take a blood test, and then there's 3 different levels. There's 5 nanograms of THC, it's a criminal level. There's a combination with 0.5 alcohol and 2.5 nanograms of cannabis. And then there's 2 nanograms, which is kind of a summary offense, which, you know, is a $1,000 fine. And you're absolutely right. Because of the lack of technology and tools, police are not charging at the same level we're seeing in roadside surveys, the number of people that are on the road. And until we get the advanced technology, you won't see it equal what we can do with alcohol. So we're way behind.
Dr. Lowe, overconsumption, like we all know that stereotype of the stoner. So have more people taken to that lifestyle as a result of legalization?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say taking to that lifestyle, and it's important for me to also state here that fatal overdose directly associated with cannabis product is extremely rare. That's not something that has been typically seen. And when people have overconsumed, that they tend to be confused, agitated, maybe not necessarily fully aware of their surroundings, and then injury and death can occur and has occurred through misadventure. anyone under the age of 25, we usually recommend that they shouldn't be starting to consume cannabis, also because some of their critical brain development is still happening up until the time they turn 25. We similarly actually encourage seniors to be careful about any new consumption of cannabis. If a senior, particularly with lower metabolism, has cannabis for the first time, maybe is confused, there may be risks of interactions with other medications they take and falls. So anything that they do certainly should be in concert with their physicians and all those other folks, just to sort of make sure that there's not going to be anything that interacts.
Okay. When we come back, we'll take some questions from the audience. That's next.
I mean, the reality is that smoke is smoke. Whatever you're putting in a vape or whatever you're putting in cannabis, that is ultimately plastering the inside lining of your lungs.
Welcome back. We'll now take questions from our audience, starting with Martin. Hi, Martin.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Please go ahead.
Actually, my question will come at the end of my statement. I want to tell you an experience that I went through. I suffer from lower back pain, which is very typical for seniors. So I went to my doctor, and he said, I don't give prescriptions for medical marijuana. You're going to have to go to a medical marijuana clinic. So I went to this so-called clinic, and it was staffed by doctors, and basically he said that I can register, but it would be delivered to my home for $200 a month. So my question is, why are the regulations so tough to get hold of medical marijuana?
I don't think the regulations are necessarily different. The issue is that medical doctors are not comfortable prescribing today because the medical research, as they would typically learn in medical school, isn't there because this product has been illegal for so long. And so it's about them getting comfortable with the medical science and then being able to practically apply it to what your condition is. I really don't think it's an issue of the regulations. I think it's an issue of the science catching up to what we as society know.
Yeah, your experience is not alone. From our consumer studies, people want access. They want actually to speak to a pharmacist or a doctor. They prefer a prescription, but you don't need one in Canada. They want to know what it will interact with. They want to talk to the same person they've always been speaking to.
It also is a call to action for physicians. The reality is that many patients out there are using cannabis, and this is something that they should be asking routinely, and they should get comfortable and competent in understanding how it interacts with drugs and how it actually may alter their patients' experiences.
I think pharmacists also have a role in this. And
absolutely.
They want a role in this.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your question.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Our next question from Ken. Hi, Ken.
Hi. Recently, there's been a lot of horror stories coming out of the U.S. about the dangers of vaping, a lot of lung injuries. And I'm just wondering if you could answer, is smoking marijuana as or less dangerous than vaping?
I'm happy to tackle that one first. I mean, the reality is that smoke is smoke. Whatever you're putting in a vape or whatever you're putting in cannabis, that is ultimately plastering the inside lining of your lungs and may certainly have health effects in the future.
But I think one important point about that story, though, is that for most of the stories that you read, these were all black market vapes. And so what seems to be the case is that there were cutting agents, which are very common in food products. And so I think it speaks to the importance of buying products from the legal market, because once again, these are products that are heavily tested. There's heavy regulations, and so you know that you're getting a product that isn't going to harm you medically, right?
Thank you.
When we come back, final thoughts from our panelists. That's next.
In a previous episode of theZoomer, we discussed scams. On Facebook, John writes, millennials are a lot more gullible to advertising than Zoomers, who pay little attention to marketing and scams. As a senior, I see very few ads on the internet because I block them. In another episode, we spoke about Zoomer beauty. On Twitter, Jackie writes, I can't stand needles. I also don't feel it is necessary to inject yourself with all these serums. Just love the way you look naturally. There's no one else like you out there. Hashtag beautiful me. Keep the comments coming in and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and via email at rsvp@zoomermedia.ca. Don't forget, for free tickets to the show, go to www.universe.com and search Zoomer Media and log on to www.thezoomertv.com for full episodes and more.
Welcome back to the Zoomer. It's now time for final thoughts from our panelists, starting to my left.
Thank you, Libby. You know, with more research coming out and not anecdotal evidence, you know, we're going to see a rise in the use of cannabis. So we're going to find other ways of getting the medicinal and recreational uses under control.
Yeah, one of our new strategies is to work with technology companies to get solutions to alcohol and drugs, and having in-car technology so it actually detects drugs and alcohol before the actual car is in motion and basically stops, you know, the person from putting themselves and others at danger.
We're very on in an emerging market, and making sure that we continue to evolve and educate ourselves with verified information and continue to grow with this industry so that we can elevate it and remove the stigma is very important for all of us, not only from this panel, but the public as well.
The most important thing we can do is continue to hold our government to account. There is more to be done, but we should also take stock of what we already have.
We know that legalization from a health perspective was actually a positive thing overall, both in terms of removing the stigma around use and also opening the opportunity for further research and questions. The important thing to remember, though, is that legal doesn't mean completely safe.
I think even though we're early days, I'm very encouraged by the responsibility of all the different players in this industry. I think that the significant players in this industry have all taken a role in making sure that consumers are educated in the right way, and it's about consumers being educated about what they're using.
And from an industry perspective, I would say we have a duty to do three things. The first is innovation, bringing products to market that the consumer and the medical patient want and need. To piggyback on education, we have a duty to do that. Education for the good of public safety, education for the good of people's health needs, and research. It's so important to invest in that research so that we can confidently make the claims and offer products with labels.
I think my final word would just be that I would love to do our third iteration of our consumer study and listen to what people are saying again, because education is the key. Legalization was not supposed to promote use, but it was supposed to get rid of or decrease the black market. Has not quite worked. And that marketers of all products will have a huge role in making sure that consumers know what they're taking, when, why, and how it might affect them.
Okay, thank you for being with us. We hope this program was useful, and we'll see you soon. It's time to zoom out.